Kingsley. I am founder of Kingsley Climate Group. We are a design and research firm that we started in 1998. And I am also currently the chair of the Center for Plain Language. We are a actually, we are a North American nonprofit, and we advocate for plain language in all content. So I'm excited to be here today because today is World International Plain Language Day. So it's a day that we celebrate plain language and really talk about its importance and how much it can help everyone. So I'm going to talk to you today about plain language, but really 5 steps to creating better content, because I know everybody here, we are all UX professionals, and so we're really looking at how we can increase usability and we can make our content better for our users. So I'll go ahead and get started with my presentation. So first, I hope you all can see this on your screen, but even if you can't, you're probably seeing this bigger than you would actually see it. It's an actual bus schedule. And just a question for you. So if you miss the 2:35 bus leaving Hancock and Buenaventura and going to Flint Ridge and Academy, when will the next bus come? So hopefully you are staring intently at this bus schedule and maybe even trying to get closer to it to figure out what that answer is. So we have our choices: 3:15, 3:05, 2:45, and 3:35. So just think about what your answer is. And what I suspect is that many of you got B, 3:05, because when we look at leaving Hancock and Buenaventura and we see 2:35, and the very next line has the next bus coming at 3:05. And it's even highlighted, it's even bolded for us. But what if I told you that that answer is wrong? Because actually, the next bus that is coming is at 3:35. And why is that? Because if you go up to this very helpful little legend at the top, we see buried within this information that buses run 1 hour apart at all other times of the day and Saturday. So when I give this to people in training or in presentations, I find that most people, I would say about 75%, get this wrong. And the reason is not because we are not smart people. I'm going to assume we're all smart individuals, but because the design of this document that is supposed to help people do something as simple as get on a bus is not designed well at all. It hides useful, important information. It confounds us with a lot of numbers and some bizarre bolding. So it's really just not a good piece of information. And what I would say is that we are actually inundated with bad information. Bad information is everywhere. And when I say bad information, what do I mean? Well, I mean information that's difficult to access, that's not accessible, that doesn't meet our audience's needs, that's not built for our prevailing literacy levels in the United States, that's unclear or hard to interpret and understand, information that's poorly designed. And this is another example, this Terminal B. Tell me where gate 206 is. I can't tell because the arrows are going in both directions. So in short, bad information is information that's not usable, and by extension, it's not useful either. Because when people can't use it for their intended purposes, then the question is, why does it exist at all? So I'm going to talk about the role of plain language and how we can address this. So A definition of plain language. A lot of people think about plain language as being about easy words. That if we replace hard words with easy words, then that will fix the issue. But we think of plain language in a much broader scope. So a communication is in plain language if the wording, structure, and design are so clear that the intended audience can find what they need, understand it, and use it. So we're looking at words, we're looking at structure, we're looking at design, and ultimately, we're thinking about, can someone find, understand, and use? So all the aspects of usability are included in this definition of plain language. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you achieve plain language in your documents. And some of this is not going to be new to you because as UX professionals, you're thinking about much of this all the time. So first, you really want to think about identifying and describing your target audience or audiences. So this is actually the most important step. And it's actually the step that I feel most people step over. So they don't think carefully enough about who will be using this document, this piece of information, this app, this website, whatever it is you're designing. And you really want to be thinking very thoroughly about the audience. Who are they? What barriers do they have? How do they think about the topic? What literacy levels are they functioning at? Do they have disabilities? Are there stressors? Are there time constraints? There's so many things we can think about with our target audience. So we're really needing to think thoroughly about that audience because that's what's going to set up the later design decisions that we make. So we need to list what people need and what they need to know. We need to list out the tasks that we want them to complete. And we want to think of the characteristics of those audience groups that will influence our design. So a lot needs to happen in this first step, and that will carry us through as we're designing and developing information. So step one works when you know who you're designing for, what they want to do, and what they need to know and learn. So this is really the foundation of the home or the building. So without a solid foundation of understanding your audience, the rest of your building is not going to be safe and sound. So then we want to structure the content to guide the reader through it. So this is all about organization. It's really thinking about how we're going to break the content into shorter sections that reflect natural stopping points or that reflect the tasks in an appropriate way for our audience. So it's really what is the whole universe of content that we're trying to connect with our reader, and then how can we organize that in a logical and effective way that best meets our audience needs. We want to then write headings that will help readers predict what's happening. And if you're designing a website, that would be more like for a document. If we're designing a website, we want to think about the chunks of information that we're including on pages and then how we're going to guide our readers into subsequent pages. So we're really thinking about taking, again, this large chunk of information and breaking it up into smaller chunks and adding signposts that would guide the readers. So step two works when your audience can quickly and confidently find the information that they're looking for. So again, it's really not about us as designers. Can we find the information? Because we know our information. So we're more easily going to be able to go through it. We care about, can the audience find the information that they're looking for? Step three is where we get into what most people think about as plain language. So this is about the writing. And it is about keeping information short and to the point. You want short, logical sentences. You want to present information in an order that makes sense to the reader. So once you're within your paragraphs, within the the meat of the content, you're presenting it in a logical way. This is also where you're thinking about details. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't think enough about when they're designing information, which is including details that help the reader complete the tasks and leaving out details that don't help or may distract readers. And I think we have a hard time thinking about details because as designers, we have what we want to present. So we have the content that we want to give to readers. But in reality, what we want to present is not nearly as important as what they need to complete tasks. So we have to move away from our own personal sense of what's important and reframe it as what is important to the audience. What do they need to complete the task? Because sometimes it's not what we want to say. Sometimes they need different information. We want to connect our ideas, sentences, paragraphs, and we want to set a helpful tone. So using conversational language and making it not legal or bureaucratic, but really writing in the way that our audience would talk. So keeping it simple. We want to pick the right words. So use words that our audience would know. Use strong verbs, an active voice. And in some ways, I try to tell people when I'm doing training to go back to really simple, straightforward ways of talking. As we get older, we tend to make our information naturally more bureaucratic. We're almost trained to be bad writers when we go to college because we're asked to do things like write in passive voice and make it sound really academic. But in reality, we need to undo that and go back to earlier ways of speaking that are simpler, more straightforward. That's what our audiences need. So, step 3 works when our readers understand the words and can grasp our intended message quickly and confidently. And again, remember, I keep coming back to this word confidently. We want our audience to be confident with the information we're giving them. If they're on our website or using our information and they're unsure at every step of what they should be doing, then we have not built the information correctly. Information should always give our users confidence as they use it, confidence that they can complete tasks and that they can get to the actions that they need to get to. Step 4 is using information design to help readers see and understand the information. So we've talked about headers and subheaders, and those are not just for decoration. Headers are important cognitively because they give our readers a way to skim. So readers naturally want to skim information. Nobody will read anything you give them word for word. And if they have headers and subheaders, it gives them a very quick way to get through the content and find the key pieces of information. You want to choose font, size, color, emphatic techniques that guide the reader's attention and that don't overwhelm them. You know, I often tell my audiences, if you emphasize everything, you emphasize nothing. So you want to be careful how you're choosing and selecting the design elements so that you're getting the reader's attention where they need it to be. You want to use white space and grids to help you organize the information, and then use images, illustrations, and icons, any visual element to make the content easier to understand. And also, I advise people don't think of your graphics as just merely decoration. Think of them as how is a graphic that I'm including going to help? Is it going to give them, is it a reflection of the information so that we're further emphasizing a point, Or are we just merely throwing in a picture to throw in a picture? So think about the visuals that you use. And step 4 works when users can notice and use the signpost to move through the information efficiently and effectively. And then step 5, and I think we're all aware of this, is really using testing so that we can really make sure that our design and content is working. So there are many ways to do this, and I would advocate doing it throughout the process. So start at the beginning by asking users to describe key concepts or processes in their own words. They will tell you how they think of the concepts and processes, and then you can mimic that in the design. You want to test your navigational signposts, your organization. Do users find it predictable? Is it, again, giving them confidence? You want to test for readability and understandability. When they read something, are they taking away the points that you want? And finally, are they finishing the tasks that you want them to finish easily and confidently? You know, there's nothing that drives me more crazy than when I'm working on a piece of information with a client and I say, well, what do you want them to do with this? And they say, oh, I just want them to be informed. And I think, yeah, but how would you test that? What would it mean to be informed? Do you want them to do something? Maybe you want them to not do something, but you really need to think about what that is so you can design appropriately to that. You always want to note where they're stumbling or misunderstanding and then rethink those parts. You know, as usability professionals, and I know you know this more than anyone, it is a very humbling experience because every time you're testing it, you are putting it out there and saying, tell me what's wrong. And that's good because when we know what's not working, we can improve it and make it better for our users. So step 5 works when they really when we have information that meets the definition of plain language. They can find what they need, they can understand what they find, they can act on it confidently. When we've gotten there, we know that we've tested to a point where this content is effective. I wanted to show a quick example. This is the type of information I tend to work with, which tends to be legal information, legal programs, disclosures, and often these can get incredibly complex and bureaucratic because they're typically based in regulation. And regulations are not designed to be easy to read or understand. So when you look at a page like this, I think the first thing I notice when I look at a page like this is the sense that I don't want to read it because it's incredibly complex. It's dense. I already see words that are complex and difficult to understand. There's a lot of emphasis happening, so it's hard to know where my attention as a reader should go. So yeah, this is just a page that has really important information, but it's not particularly accessible information. So going back to our plain language steps to improve content, just a quick rethinking of this. And this is a first draft rethinking. We can come back, we can think about our audience. This is an elderly audience, low literacy. Some may not speak English as a first language. So we really need to immediately start reducing words. We also need to add headings because that can help someone quickly find what they need. So right here, do you have a reverse mortgage and need help? One heading can allow people to self-select in or out of this document. So this is specifically for people with reverse mortgages, not just any elderly person, but someone who has a reverse mortgage. Putting information in order of importance. Do you have it? Do you have a reverse mortgage? Are you eligible? And then what do I do next? We removed a lot of the difficult words and conditional statements. One thing, when you get into this document, the original, there's a lot of conditionals. Do you have this, this, and this? And if so, then you can do that. That's a conditional statement. one way to fix that is by presenting it in a more graphical way. So including this table of, okay, I am a resident. I live in my property as a main residence. Going through that with just simple yes and no helps clarify those conditionals. And then finally, what we don't have here is the testing. So this would be a first draft. I would expect that once we put this in front of the actual audience, we would learn a lot more about what's working and not working, and we would revise it more. So your first draft is never typically the final draft. There's more to be done to get it to the optimal plain language. So that is all that I wanted to present, about 5 quick steps to plain language. Some of this I'm sure was new to you. Maybe some of it was new. I'm sure a lot of it was not new, because again, my expectation is that we have many UX professionals here. So you're already thinking of design and usability as a process. But I would be interested in taking any comments that anyone might have. So I'm going to close this out and get back to my screen here and stop presenting. Okay.
Hi, Barbara. That was a great presentation. Thank you very much. And if anyone out there have any questions, you can place the questions in the Twitch comments, and we will ask Barbara the questions, and she will answer. But just to start off the Q&A, right? I made some notes. I like writing. I'm a writer. I like taking notes. So one thing I took from your presentation was the idea of the third and first person. So when I'm originally not from the United States, right? So speaking in active language or in active form wasn't really something that I could do easily. So are there any tips that you could give in terms of how do you make that transition from using third person and not third person, sorry, the active to passive to active? Yeah.
So active voice is how we tend to naturally speak. So when we are talking, we are typically speaking in active voice, but something happens when we write that we tend to start removing some of the action orientation from our sentences. So let me give an example. We did an experiment. Okay, that would be active. You know who the subject is, and it's we did an experiment. A passive version of that would be something like the experiment was done. So we don't know who did the experiment. Right. We just know that it happened, right? So what I tend to advise people is to really think about, do I have clear pronouns, or am I saying things with I, we, you, right? Those pronouns with my verbs. If you can't find that clear, or do I have a clear, like an actor in my subject spot? So am I saying something like, I know this sounds like a silly example, but you know, the dog ran away, right? As opposed to, well, that one wouldn't be a great example, but you want some noun, some very obvious noun actor in that first subject slot. So I would just always, and if you're doing things that are consumer facing, you probably almost always want to be saying you, or you want your headings to be what can you do, or what can I do, because you might want them to be thinking of it as an I, but you almost never want to be doing things that don't have pronouns because they're consumer facing. You want people to be able to recognize themselves in the document or information you're developing.
So one of the things that, as you mentioned, pronouns, one of the questions that came to my mind is, how do you know that a lot of individuals are kind of looking at, okay, how do we handle pronouns, right? Would you say, like, replacing. I was gonna say replacing the person's name, but when we're speaking to a user or we're speaking to a
Mhm.
a large audience, um, is there any specific thing that we should take into consideration that we can
I mean, I think as
avoid?
if you're representing an organization, I would typically be saying the most conversational way you can think about it is we as the organization and
Hmm.
you as
I
the
you.
ultimate user.
Okay.
So I think that, and also I just think that is, it makes it seem much more accessible to people. There's it, I see things on a lot of times government websites where you'll have things like the passport holder should do X, Y, or Z. I think it's always better when you're saying things like you, you,
Right.
the passport holder, should do X, Y, or Z.
Right. Right. So any questions from uh, from you others? No, Adrian? No.
I have a question. Yeah. Um,
Yep.
so whenever you are given something like the document that you showed, the government document that's very dense and wordy, do you have a process that you go through for dissecting that information and making it easier to digest or comprehend for the user?
Yeah, so typically, again, the first thing that I would do is spend a fair amount of time identifying who the audience is. So collecting as much information as I could about that audience. And that takes some time because you're really trying to figure out, all right, who ideally is going to be using this document or this piece of information. And the more you can dissect that, the better, because that ultimately becomes the filter for how you're filtering through that information. The next thing that I do is I take the information, I read it carefully, and then as my prior business partner, we're still business partners, but she's retiring right now, would say, I blow it up. So essentially, I take the information and I think, well, if I could just take all this information and put it back in any order that I wanted to best meet this user's needs, how would I do that? And usually I'm thinking of priority questions that they would have. So the first thing is always, what is this? So the first question every user always has is, what is this? And then, why am I seeing it? Or why am I getting it? Or why am I here? And then, what do I do? And so I will reorganize it in those ways. But I think the blowing it up part is important because we tend to get really connected to the way things are already on a page. And that holds us back from rethinking it completely differently. And so I always tell people there's nothing special about how this original was done. That's just how it was done. So now, how can we do it in a completely different way if we had no constraints? And we could eliminate anything we wanted and we could reorganize it in any way that we wanted. So I think that's the way that I tend to, to think about it. The other thing I wanted to note is that we often think about things in our own from our own framework. So a really good example is that we often tend to care a lot about telling people the why, like why we're doing this, why. But what's interesting is that, most users don't often care about the why. They want to know why at some very small level, why am I getting this? Like, why me? But really, they tend to want to move to action. So sometimes we just need to reprioritize. It's not that you can't tell them the why or that you shouldn't or that you should hold that back, but it might be lower on that priority list. So that's the way that I tend to go through a document or content as I'm starting to develop it.
Any questions, Grant? No. Okay. So I also made note that you stated that I think it. I'm just paraphrasing. Don't use your graphic as just graphics, right?
Yeah.
That's what you said. Something
Yeah.
towards that you said.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
kind of really like that in a sense because it kind of um, makes me think of when we design things, we should look at communicating the message.
Hmm.
So can you further expand on that? Because that's what I took from it, and
Yeah.
I think it's a good message, a really good message for the
Yeah.
designers of.
I think we're really thinking about what is our communicative intent here. What are we trying to overall, what's the net impression that we're hoping to give to our audience? And I think a lot of times what happens is we do pretty well with the content, the written part. But then when it gets to the graphics, we suddenly go into decoration mode. Like, well, how can I decorate this to make it look pretty? And,
Right.
it's not to say that you shouldn't make things look pretty. But what my point is think about how that visual could tie in with the content, how it could further reflect your communicative intent and be less of just wallpaper and more of something that can really reinforce the message that you're trying to give. So even on things like the slides that I used, I really try to spend a lot of time picking pictures that I think reflect what I'm trying to say in that slide. So if I'm talking about words, you know, I love that little visual because I actually use that visual where you put words on Legos and you have people put the Legos together into sentences. I use that exercise in training. So it's really something that reflects. So it's not that you can't use pictures or you can't use nice looking graphics, but really thinking about it as more than just, oh, here's a decorative element, slap it on there. And I
Great.
think, unfortunately, we've all been a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? We have a lot of stock art out there. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes we all get a little lazy because it's really easy to just be like, woman sitting at a table with a computer. Boom, give me my graphic. And we don't think about, well, is that really communicating what I want?
So we have attendees from Brazil as well. So
Wow.
we just like to say hello to the viewers out there.
Hello.
um, Also, I know we spoke a lot about plain language, right? But what we didn't get into was a little bit more about yourself. So I'm hoping that you could tell us more about you and also your work that you do at Kingsley Kleinman
Yep.
Group,
Hmm.
and also maybe some of the stuff that you do at the Center for Plain Language, because we know that you are the chair, and
Yes.
that's very good. We're excited that you're here to join us.
Yeah, certainly. So, uh, we started working in this field in 1995, and I was very fortunate because my first job out of college was with a research firm in DC, and they did applied research on all types of things. But my area was called the Information Design Center. So our research was all around information design. So was the information designed appropriately for users? So that's where I really cut my teeth in this world. A few years later, my business partner and I left and started Kingsley Kleiman, and we were just doing an extension of that same work. So people come to us and say, "Hey, I have information that's not working," or "Hey, I want to design information that works better. Help me." And we were continuing to just do design that was always backed up by research. So it's never just about our opinion of what works. It's always what works for the actual consumer. So just lots and lots of qualitative and quantitative testing of information to see if it works. We've done we've done quite a few big projects, but one that pretty much every single person that's in the US will have seen is if you open up your credit card, you get these from your credit card company and they tell you how your information is shared. And it has a little grid on the side that says, who do we share with? When do we share what? that was our document. So you don't know us, but you know something we've designed. That was a very extensive process. And it was 7 agencies coming together to design information. So we were working with the lawyers from 7 agencies, trying to figure out what content to include and then design it in a way that literally every citizen, every consumer who has a credit card or any type of financial account could use. And so after a year of just really extensive iterative testing, design and testing, that's what we came up with. And it worked really well. And by that point, we had tested it so much, we knew it was working. We knew that people could use it for the intended purpose. Another document is the document that the loan estimate and closing disclosure that you get when you buy a house. So anybody who gets that, it shows what your loan amount will be. Will it change? That was something that we designed. And again, that was not our opinion of what worked. That was 500 consumers later saying this is something that we know works. So that's a lot of what we do. And at the Center for Plain Language, it's the same. We're advocating for how we can develop plain language in every document, every time. And our big push right now is we're actually in sort of the final stages of ISO standards around plain language. So there will be ISO standards coming out in the next year or so that will be able to guide people in developing plain language information. So that's what we do.
Great. Thank you very much. So from the chat, we have someone is saying that this is speaking to my heart. I'm on a document revamp right now, trying to tread the line between legacy acceptable and not mind numbing.
I hear you.
And someone else said, I'm beginning in the legal design. Would like some reference in plain language. It is a buzzword in Brazil, but some folks forget us plain language.
Yeah.
Forget using plain language. Sorry.
That's really interesting. So legal design is just a world that is just exploding. I love it because I think it is just a long time coming, but it's really the idea that we can rethink not just legal documents, but really the design of the legal system. And this is happening all over the world. I have people that I work with in South Africa, in Finland, and across the European Union that are working in legal design. And I think it is fantastic because there is probably nowhere that we need more reform and change than in the legal systems and the way that people are informed about legal, their legal rights, how to, what they need when they go to court. This is an area that we've had lawyers really have kind of built the system. And I love lawyers. I work with almost all my clients are lawyers, but they're often looking at it from a different perspective than the actual end user. So thinking about it from an end user perspective, what does an end user of the legal system need? How do we communicate with them, right? So there's a lot happening there. I think that's great.
Yeah, someone said I have to read lots of ISO privacy practitioner and really is painful.
One of the things that comment reminds me is how at the beginning of the presentation, I said we're inundated with bad information. And it's something that just as a society, as a population, we've just come to just accept bad information as the default. Like we just are like, oh, well, I just have to read bad information. I just have to use bad stuff. I just have to have contracts that are this big. So, but it doesn't need to be that way. And so I think that if we all come together and think about, well, maybe those contracts don't have to look like that. Maybe that documentation doesn't have to be so difficult to understand. Maybe my, you know, I remember back in the old days, it was trying to figure out how to program your VCR, you know, or how to, you know, program something like your microwave, and you get like a documentation thing that's this big. It's like, come on, you know, this should be easy.
So being involved with the plain language movement for as long as you have, like, how have you seen the results of your work, or just the work in general, and like, how has it evolved over time?
Well, you know, one thing it's completely evolved. I mean, when we first started in this world in the mid 90s, there was just this small group of people sort of agitating for plain language, for lack of a better word. And then I think it really started picking up steam in the early 2000s. And one of the most important things that happened was that we actually, the plain language community was able to pass a law in the US that requires plain language in federal information. So the Plain Writing Act was passed. That was a big step, because it was really, now we had a law saying, look, this information needs to be clear and in plain language. And in fact, that law it looks like there will be a new law coming in that's been presented by Senator Langford, which is, so for Oklahomans, kind of surprising, but he is the co-sponsor of a bill that would do similar things as the Plain Writing Act, but maybe take it even a little bit further in how to think about plain writing in the federal government, and the design of better documents and information. So I think now what's happening is that I see plain language being discussed much more just in the world. Like you'll read articles and people are talking about plain language and how that can improve our systems, how that can improve how government works, how the health world works, really how all these systems work. So I think now we're getting a lot more recognition of the importance of plain language and the fact that it's not about dumbing down information. When we first started in plain language, people were all saying, "Oh, we don't want to dumb down our information," but it's not about dumbing down at all. Every single person appreciates plain language. We all appreciate information that is easy to use and understand. So there is absolutely no reason not to use it, because we're doing something that everybody would want. So I think now that people are starting to recognize that look, it's not about watering your message down. It's about making it more usable. And when it is more usable, I think this is the other big change I've seen. Organizations now see the benefit. If someone can read a letter and understand it more quickly, then you've saved time. If they don't pick up the phone to call to get clarification, that saves an organization money. So both win. The user wins because they understand. The organization wins because they're not having to have repeated touch points with a consumer. So now that that's being recognized, that hey, this is a good thing for everyone, it's gotten a lot more traction.
Any questions? Any other questions, Grant? No? Yes, it's okay. You're good.
No. In fact, if anything, I think they want to add more. I don't think I've ever met a client that is really excited about slimming their content down. And again, what this gets back to is just, I think it's almost a primal urge that we want to tell everything that we know. So as an organization, we want to give our audience everything that we think is important. that key shift is just because it's important to you does not mean it's important to your consumers. And so if you can get your client to see that, that's when you can start really slimming it down, because you can start showing, hey, just because we want to say X, Y, and Z does not mean that our user needs X, Y, and Z. It could just be our compulsion to tell them everything because we really know our stuff and we want to put it all out there. But the user may have no need for that information, or even if we include it, it may be very deprioritized. It could be that it's not the first thing we need to tell them. So yeah, it's hard with clients because it's a real process. So you really have to kind of help guide them through and thinking about things again with that user as the funnel of the information.
Do you have like a specific process? Because I know where Grant's coming from when you're trying to reduce the amount of content to display on the site, and there's always a lot of pushback, and it's complicated to get them on your side. Do you have any I guess tips on how to make that conversation run a little bit more smoothly?
Yeah, first of all, I think the more that you can bring people together into design meetings, the better. Because what I think happens a lot is that we do this back and forth review, but what that tends to do is almost create a dynamic where you as the designer have a change and then they get to change it, and then you're negotiating back and forth it's not a great process, right? A better process is bring people together to really think through these design decisions that need to be made at key points in the process. So in the beginning, bringing people together to think about audience and getting their consensus on that. Because again, the more you can get consensus, the more that you can build on that as you go. So if you get consensus that, hey, these are our users and these are their priorities, then when you get to the next step, which is whittling down the content, you can really come back to that and say, but hey, is this decision that we're making to add this piece of content, is that meeting any of our user needs or our priority decisions that we made earlier? So doing a little bit more of that, it's a little more time intensive in some ways, but what I find is that the time that you invest in having those types of content meetings, you actually end up shortening the process because you don't have as many back and forths, because all of those back and forths are adding time as well to your development process. So even though it seems a little like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have a 2-hour meeting with my clients to work through some of these audience decisions, but that work you do up front will save you time in the end because you will have more consensus about what's important. You will have set priorities for the information, and you will build that filter that you can come back to throughout the process.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. So is there any way you would like we can contact you? Anyone out there can contact you if they would like to get in touch with you? Any companies out there?
Yes, absolutely. So B Kingsley at Kingsley-Kleiman, that's KLEIMANN.com, or let's see, what is it? B Kingsley at centerforplainlanguage.org. So anywhere, and Carrie, I know they can also contact you. You know how to get in touch with me. You can find me on LinkedIn and connect with me there as well. That's kind of an easy place, and I do post things about content and UX and plain language. So certainly LinkedIn is a great place, and I'd love to continue the conversation with anyone.
Yes. So I do follow your comments. I look at your comments and your posts on LinkedIn, so they're very helpful. So if anyone out there, you can also connect with Barbara Kingsley at on LinkedIn, and you will see some of the good information that she posts out there as well. Yeah. So I would like to, we have like just about 8 more minutes in our meetup session. And just before everyone go, I would just like to thank Techlahoma for making this happen. So Techlahoma is a nonprofit organization which supports our user groups in Oklahoma. So we have, I think, about 60 something groups. Is that right? Let me just get the data right. I just don't want to say, but we have a lot of user groups in Oklahoma, and they're tech-based user groups. And what Techlahoma is trying to do is trying to encourage the tech community to be a little bit more engaging and try to learn and try to scaffold individuals to be better tech professionals and help us grow our career. And you having you today really helped because we know UX is kind of a buzz word out there right now. It's we have a lot of different views, and we think like hearing from people like you who has that um, expert level of experience, you know, kind of helps us in terms of understanding, you know, what the field is like, you know, what and particularly how plain language plays in UX. And so that was very helpful. Um, yeah, so I just have one last question. The Sometimes when people hear plain language, they kind of feel like plain language is almost like dumbing down the language. But listening to your presentation, it seems like more of a I would say thoughtful process of trying to connect to the users, right? Do you have difficulty with organizations or trying to convince organizations to adopt a plain language approach in their organization?
Initially, sometimes yes, for the reason that you mentioned, because people don't want to dumb down or water down their content. So, really, it becomes about talking to them about what plain language really is. And it really is about connecting with your target audiences and using words that are common for them. So, here's a great example. If your specific audience is um, astrophysicists, right? Then it's okay to use jargon that astrophysicists would know, right? Because that would be plain for them. But that would not be plain for another audience. So it really is about connecting to your audience and finding the language design and content strategies that are going to work best for that audience. Every audience is different. And but one thing that is important is that organizations that are writing for many audiences, that's where you have to be really careful, because you really need to think about, well, what is the literacy level of this entire audience? If it's a document that's got to be used by people all over the United States of all different demographics, then you really have to start thinking and making choices about that information so that it's plain for everyone. So again, I just try to think of it as we're really about connecting the information to the audience, and that's our job. And how do we do that in a way so that it is so clear that they can use it quickly and easily for what they need?
Right, right, right. Thank you very much um, for that answer. Um, any other questions, Adrian, Grant? Okay, so I think we're close. We're only just 4 minutes off. So I think maybe it's time that we like I guess end. And I would first like to thank you for attending, presenting to our user group. It was really great. As I say, I would like to thank Techlahoma and everyone out there, if you're watching this right now or when you will be watching it in the future, because we have it on Twitch, it's streaming on Twitch right now. That's the Techlahoma account. You can find Barbara Kingsley at her LinkedIn account.
Mhm.
So please do reach out, connect, and say hi when you can. Um, so thank you very much, Barbara. We're really, really, really happy that you presented to us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. It was a great thing to do on International Plain Language Day. So I appreciate it so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.